corn as it does save in terms of petroleum. So you're really not gaining, you know, I understand sugar cane, which we don't have abundant here in the lower 48 states, is more efficient. I know Brazil has got, you know, a fairly large sugar cane ethanol production. I know, you know, but we're not allowed to, like, it's very difficult for us to even import.
Right.
So there's various different stories that goes with all that.
I think you'll see my next chart. I kind of break down some of that. But you brought up a great point here, is that when you look at the real cost of making a gallon of fuel from any one of these sources, you have to look at the full life cycle cost. So what you were referring to is that, is it net energy positive or negative? And so you're right, with corn ethanol, it's a little bit on the negative side. And again, it depends on whose numbers you believe. And the corn industry will tell you maybe a little bit otherwise. And what we mean by that is that, so to get corn ethanol, that means you have to plant the corn. So that means you have to have, let's say, 10,000 acres of a corn farm in Iowa. So to plant it, you need trucks and vehicles. So you got to burn fuel for that. But then also remember, you need herbicides and pesticides. And remember, the runoff of that goes into the Mississippi River, which goes then eventually into the Gulf and creates all these sort of algae blooms, which suffocates a lot of the marine wildlife. And it's horrible for all of those people that live on the Gulf Coast. And so, you know, these are, when you look at all those sorts of costs and the environmental degradation, so it doesn't make sense from an environmental standpoint. Neither does it make sense that you're putting more energy into the process than what you're getting out of a gallon of that ethanol to begin with. So it's not really making sense other than, hey, if you're a big farm, if you're Archer Daniels Midland, your treasury is getting filled with money. And so, you know, the way those sort of spin it, and you see some of the ads on mainstream TV, is, hey, we're bringing jobs to America. But how many cancer patients are you all also putting? And so, you know, when you really do that full equation, you realize there are a lot of problems with fuel of any sort. Oh, here we go. Okay, so okay, so to give you a little idea of how much we're making here in the U.S., you'll notice production was sort of peaked out in 2008. Do you remember what fuel costs were in 2008 summer? Right, like $4.50, getting close to sort of $5. Most of this, let's say 700 million gallons, was coming from what I call the big box methodology of biodiesel. It came from, let's say, companies like ADM, Archer Daniels Midland, probably the biggest player in biodiesel in the United States. So what they would do, they will buy, let's say, a 10,000 acre soybean farm in Iowa. And remember what I was mentioning before. So to make the soybean, you have to, you need herbicides, pesticides. You need tractors and trailers. You have to plant it, harvest it. So there's a whole life cycle to get to a crop of soybean. Then you have to crush it. So when you do the math, that life cycle analysis, you realize you're putting in a lot of energy to get out a gallon of soybean biodiesel. My next chart will show not all biodiesel is equal, and ethanol is even worse. It's just sort of the chemistry that comes behind the corn and the soybean sort of molecules and then the properties of that. Next time you're on Jeopardy, remember this term is called transesterification. That's the actual chemical term used of how you turn oil into fuel. You can beat Watson on that next time. So production has gone down. That's because ADM will take that 10,000 acre farm and build a 100 million gallon plant there, which is very operationally expensive. And as fuel prices sort of came down, they realized that their profit margins were coming down, and it wasn't as profitable to make soybean-based biodiesel versus just selling the corn to in the food markets. So what I say is, what I want to do is just the opposite. I want to build 100 1 million gallon plants, and I'll put them in every local community. After I won that grant, I got a lot of calls from a lot of different mayors, not only in Chicago, but a lot of suburban mayors and whatnot. Why? Well, as my slides will show further on, is we're creating jobs, creating a tax base. Like I said, you can't outsource this. The grease is coming from the local community. And also who I want to hire is also a big part of this. But to finish up this slide, according to the biodiesel board, like I said, there's at least a market size of 3 billion gallons. This number alone is that a lot of state governments, Minnesota's sort of like the leader in this field, they're realizing the viability of biodiesel. Now, again, I'm referring to this sort of soy-based biodiesel, but this sort of local production model, like I said, we're literally less than half of 1% here in the United States. But it's something that we have a lot of grease, and everyone loves French fries. And it's something that I think we could pick up sort of the slack here. Were there other questions? Did you have a question?
My question was, for like petroleum-based products, like plastics or whatnot, is this biodiesel an option to produce those?
Absolutely. Like I said, this is the low-hanging fruit that I'm sort of referring to, something that's easy for, but there are a lot of lubricants, a lot of additives that you can use to replace. I mean, petroleum is everywhere. I mean, on the creams that you put on your body and on your lips in the wintertime. I mean, petroleum jelly, Vaseline. It is everywhere, and it's horrible for you. I guess if you're an oncologist, you want the status quo, and the American Medical Association loves it, but we really want to get away from it.
The market size, you're saying that is that total fuel consumption in the United States, 3 billion gallons?
Yeah, is that this is what they think we could have a need for, just based on that every state wants to lower the carbon emissions.
Okay, so that's not all, because I was just doing I read the paper the other day that the U.S. average consumption of oil, for 70% of it is transportation, is 18.5 million gallons a day.
Oh yeah, no.
So
What we use is this number is for what biodiesel is. So this would be as sort of a B5 blend or a B20 blend. Now that's another part which I'll get to in just a minute here. You're asking all the good questions. Okay, so let's get to the why. I think this chart is sort of what we were sort of referring to earlier. So down here, this is what we know, right? So we have coal, gasoline, diesel, natural gas. And so this is CO2 emissions per joule. So that's sort of the measure. As you can see, coal, a lot of CO2 emissions. So anyone who tells you there's clean coal, no. That's their lobby trying to sell you on coal. And what the coal industry will say, hey, most electricity that's made in the United States comes from us, so if you shut us down, you're not going to have these lights going on. So that's something I also want to be very particular about. I'm not here to demonize anyone. Instead, I want to build that bridge of that. With awareness, we can see what's happening here, and then how do we work with that? People often say, Manish, with your competitors, would it be BP? I wish I was that big to be a competitor to BP. Most likely what will happen is they'll become an investor. They'll become a partner as we grow. Because they'll realize that, one, if you have to go 25,000 feet into Mother Earth to get a gallon of the crude oil, maybe there are better ways to sort of do this. And what I'm trying to show here